The most important thing I would say is think of AI like a skill, not a career field. It's not that you have to go work for a tech company in order to be part of the technological change that's happening. It's that you need to learn more about how to use these tools to make you better at whatever it is you do.
Welcome to Warrior Money, the show devoted to supporting our brother and sister veterans. I'm Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Dan Kunze.
Today, we're joined by Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a Navy veteran, showing that we're bipartisan, by the way, former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and a former U.S. Secretary of Transportation. Pete has built a career defined by service and leadership, both in uniform and in government. But right now, the nation is in the middle of a government shutdown that's affecting thousands of our brother and sister veterans. And even as major investments in infrastructure and clean energy are creating new opportunities, that's what we're going to dig in today with Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Pete, welcome to Warrior Money.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Good seeing you.
Hey, listen, we start every show with a bottom line up front. So let me go bottom line up front real quick. We're in the middle of this basically government shutdown, right? Tens of thousands of our fellow brothers and veterans have been laid off, not getting paid. Millions are not getting their paychecks right now. The ripple effects, though, have really hurt our brother and sister veterans. You know, how could they turn that around and have basically opportunity and stability when they go and take these government jobs?
Well, people who decide to serve the American public deserve better than what they're getting. That's true right now. That's been true for a long time. One of the things we were proud of when I was leading the Department of Transportation was the share of our workforce who were veterans. And so many people serve the country twice over, once in uniform, and then they turn around and they're doing any number of things from air traffic control to working at TSA to making sure that our food is safe at the Department of Agriculture, so many other things. And we need to make sure that there is more stability and more security. Now, there is a lot of support when you look at the different people who want to make sure that our veterans and our public servants thrive. And a lot of times, if you look at the website of, like say you're banking at USAA, there'll be a little banner there saying if you're affected by the shutdown, we're here for you. But again, people shouldn't be in a position of having to turn for that kind of help. We want a country that just works. And I want us to get back to basics in terms of making sure that that happens, including the politics of the moment, where obviously a lot of people's health care is on the line. And we need the Congress, first of all, I need the House of Representatives to come into session. I don't know why the speaker's not willing to bring them together. If we got a lot of people out there working with no paycheck, the least that Congress could do, the least that the speaker could do is bring Congress back to
and
their
they're still
job.
getting paid, by the way, for the record.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not a good look. But also get together, figure out a way forward on healthcare, and get everybody back to work.
Hey, so you talked a little bit about you've got public servants in the Department of Transportation that had served the country first, and then they came to the DOT and were civilians there. You also had a similar path. So you served in the Navy, and then you've had a career public service. Can you talk a little bit about the transition from your time in the Navy into public service and what those transition points look like for you?
Well, I think they go hand in hand, but of course there is a big difference between deployed life or active duty life and military life. And one of the things that we really focused on when I was on the civilian side was engaging, hiring, and also supporting people as they work to transition their military skills into civilian skills. My path was a little bit unusual. I was already a reservist when I became mayor, but I was already a mayor when I got deployed, and so really felt that transition in both directions, which happens to a lot of people in the Guard and Reserve, of course. I think we need to learn as a society to treat that more as an asset. I remember once being in Afghanistan, actually as a civilian. I was an economic advisor and was working on issues on how they could get their agricultural regions to generate more wealth so that there'd be more stability for Afghan communities and fewer people would be vulnerable to the Taliban. And was working on this problem late at night, sitting over a spreadsheet and just said out loud, man, I wish somebody could tell me how many kilowatts it takes to run a canning factory.
Huh.
And this major sitting a couple tables down turns over and says, I can tell you that. Because he was in the Missouri National Guard. And his day job was at Oscar Mayer.
That's
And
awesome.
so, we need to recognize that, of course, there's a very different life when you're on active duty or deployment than there is in the civilian world. But these are not alien worlds. We're all
Yeah.
kind of, at the end of the day, every one of us is one person. with one story. And we should talk more about how much of a great fit there can be
Yeah, I totally
between
agree.
what we learn and do in the military and what civilian life requires of us.
Totally
Yeah.
agree.
We had, we had the Historic Infrastructure Act that was passed, and you helped execute on it. Dan and I partnered with you with a nonprofit called Task Force Movement that we launched at the White House with you and then President Biden. But that spanned obviously transportation, construction, and tech. What are those type of opportunities that it created, and how do you see it working now?
Yeah, we worked together as you mentioned on some really important efforts to plug holes in U.S. supply chains where we didn't have enough people working in certain critical sectors like trucking. And you and I knew that somebody who could be trusted to move people or goods on the highway between Jalalabad and Kabul could absolutely be trusted to be an important part of our supply chains going down I-70. But we had to support them in that kind of work. And that's just one example of where that fit lies. I think in the moment we're in, one thing we should be paying more attention to is how AI is going to change everything for a lot of different sectors. We can look at that as a threat, and it certainly can present a threat to the way we're used to doing business. We also need to work in ways that make sure it presents an opportunity, especially for veterans who have a lot of experience dealing with change, being reassigned from task to task, interacting with technology, using that technology to try to help meet a mission. And if you do that with some of the, let's face it, clunkier technology that was sometimes put in our hands on active duty, you should be very well positioned to adapt to some of the technology needs that meet the modern workforce.
No doubt.
Yeah, so we're talking about the government shutdown earlier, and part of your remit was the air traffic controllers when you were Department of Transportation Secretary. I have to admit to you right now that I don't feel super comfortable flying right now, kind of given where some of the things we're hearing about. What's your perspective on that? How do you feel about it now?
Well, yeah, I'm getting on a plane later today, and as a member of the flying public, as well as an American citizen who just has so much respect for the work that these men and women do, the last thing I want an air traffic controller worried about is how they're going to pay next month's rent, or whether they got to line up, being an Uber driver during their downtime in order to make sure they're okay on cash flow. And look, as a society, this is just one of many categories of public servant we ought to show some more respect for. It's one of the reasons I was really upset when, right out of the gate, under this Doge effort, every air traffic controller in the country got an email saying you should think about being more productive in the private sector and quit your government job. By the way, later they said that the buyouts didn't apply to the traffic controllers anyway, and they never should have got that email. And I'm just thinking, these are people that a huge chunk of our GDP, not to mention our lives, depend on. Let me tell you the good news, and it's easy to overlook this. Think about what the professionals in aviation safety have achieved in our lifetime. We went, just during the time I was secretary, 4 years with about 4 billion people, billion with a B, stepping
That's
on a
unbelievable.
plane, the total number of passenger enplanements. Out of that 4 billion, the number of commercial airline crash fatalities was 0. Why? A huge amount of attention to detail. The example that I like to use, just to show you how much detail goes into aviation safety, is if you're sitting on a plane, certain kind of planes, you might notice that little twisty plastic thing that holds a tray table in place in front of you. It's got sometimes a little notch in it so that you can hang your jacket, which is nice to have if you're traveling, you don't want to get your jacket wrinkled. If you happen to be sitting in an exit row, that little notch is not there because that jacket could add a fraction of a second per passenger to an evacuation. And if you add up a fraction of a second across a couple hundred passengers, that means you might not make that mark of, let's say, 90 seconds to get everybody off the plane. So it's just one example of the level of seriousness that the men and women who are working in the FAA, whether they're in air traffic control or aviation safety, engaging the industry, which itself employs a lot of veterans who learned these habits of attention to detail while they were serving our country. That's the kind of work that's made that civilizational achievement possible. All the more reason why we got to make sure that air traffic controllers have the resources they need, that they're getting paid. And let me say, I've got lots of very major differences of opinion with my successor in the Trump administration, as you might imagine. One thing where I'm rooting for him and his team to succeed is putting to work the dollars that Congress has committed to really upgrade and modernize the technology these controllers work with.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
no doubt. And the air traffic controllers were already shorthanded, right? And now they're obviously not getting paid, not great. And it kind of leads us to the political gridlock that we see. We see it in Washington, and I have to say one of the causes or contributing factor of it is we have the least amount of veterans in political public service. It used to be of every 5 members of Congress, 4 were veterans. Now it's less than 1 out of every 5. Do you agree that's a contributing factor?
Absolutely. Look, one of the things that I learned when I was deployed was how to trust my life to people I barely knew. And a lot of people have this experience. And a lot of the political nonsense, the polarization, that all faded away because we had a job to do. And if I was getting ready to go outside the wire and people were stepping into my vehicle, they didn't care if I was going home to a girlfriend or a boyfriend. They didn't care what country my dad immigrated from. They definitely didn't care if I was a Democrat or Republican. They just want to know that I'd checked the intel on where the IEDs were and everything else you need to know in order to do your job. And it went both ways. I knew that these people were very often different from each other and from me in terms of where they came from, what their political beliefs might have been. None of that mattered. The important thing was that we could look out for each other when we needed to. And I think that habit that you build in service is something we need a lot more of in our society and definitely in our Congress. You're a veteran of the Congress too. I'm not, but I've worked a lot with Congress, and you've got this environment there where it seems like it's all about the post, the tweet, the viral video, the fundraising email, and less about the greater purpose. It extends, I think, to our societal trust. We need more things that we belong to that cut across our political divisions. And sadly, even things like what neighborhood you live in or what profession you're part of are starting to become kind of predictors of what your politics are. So we're pretty much down to sports teams and patriotism as the things that can encompass like really overlapping political values. And we ought to lean into that and make the most of it to get more results and unstick a Congress that hasn't been producing the way Americans wanted to in a very long time.
Yeah, and I think most people don't even understand. Most veterans are actually 53% of them are actually registered independent, are not either Democrat or Republican. And you mentioned trust. So we're going to take a quick break. Secretary Pete, we'll be right back on more on War and Money. Just a moment. Welcome back. We're here with Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He's a Navy veteran, the former U.S. Secretary of Transportation. Pete, you wrote a book on trust, right? So, and you mentioned it right before the break. I know when I was in Baghdad, Iraq, and the invasion, I wouldn't wear my sunglasses. I want them to see my eyes. I want them to see what I was doing. You talked about trust in your book. Where do you see that breaking down, not just in the political spectrum, but also in private life?
Well, the whole relationship that we have to each other is starting to erode. And I think only when you lose that trust do you realize how much work it does for you. Just like you, I had a lot of experiences where establishing trust was something that I thought my life might depend on when I was deployed in Afghanistan. But there's a million ways every single day that our life depends on trust, and we just don't think about it. And we're not supposed to have to think about it. Every time you drive through an intersection, think about it. There's a red light and there's a green light, and you are literally placing a life or death level of trust in the car that's going the other way, that they're going to follow the lights just like you are. We start to lose that and nothing works. And that's something that we need to take seriously and can do a lot about as a society. I mentioned earlier the habits of trust that I built when I was serving, but you shouldn't have to go to war to get that. I'm a huge believer in civilian service opportunities. I think we ought to have more of them. We've seen AmeriCorps, although right now AmeriCorps is not being treated well by this administration. I think we should double down on it, not short it. Also at the state level, California is one example of a state that has an excellent service program that gives people opportunity. And anything that puts people with different ideas, different stories, and different values in the position of working together on something hard gives you the kind of trust that we're going to need down the line to solve community problems, political problems, national problems. If we lose that, it's going to be very hard to get anything done in our economy or in our society.
Yeah, trust is a big factor, but there's also the pace of change that people have experienced over the last 25 to 30 years, right? We had globalization, and now we have this AI age that we're living through right now. And it's really hard to trust somebody if you're only like engaging through your phone or engaging through some sort of social media platform. Like, so with the advent of AI, the advent of all this innovation, the advent of technology, the advent of change of pace, how do we get back to actually trusting one another, and how do we get back to supporting our communities?
I think it's insisting that the technology be for a purpose versus for its own sake. Technologies that are new, interesting, sometimes lucrative, but every technology we should look at from the perspective of, okay, what problem is this solving? Is this making us better off or worse off? When I think about something like machine learning, what it does um, to help me get to where I'm going with Google Maps,
There you go.
because I would be helpless without it. I've always said when I was serving, I'm the Secretary of Transportation, not navigation. And I would be in big trouble if we didn't have those map apps. On the other hand, on that very same phone that's in my pocket, there's something that could totally suck in an hour of my time to look at, let's face it, useless bullshit that holds my attention when I could be, reading a book or playing with my kids or doing something better with my time. And so we've got to ask, what is the technology actually going to amount to, and how it's going to change things for us, especially with AI coming into our economy. Look, I grew up in northern Indiana at the time that the last wave of automation, globalization, trade hit. And a lot of people were made much worse off, not just economically, but because they got thrown off in terms of their sense of belonging, where they fit in the community. Now is the time when I think we can learn the lessons of that and the lessons of service and say, okay, we are in for potentially a lot of upheaval in terms of what technology does to our economic life. How do we hold to the things that we know should endure, no matter what decade we're living in? Our love of and belief in the ideals of the United States of America, our commitment to our families and our communities and our neighbors, service that goes with that. I think those are things that can help us get through those things that shouldn't change, should help us get through the things that do change. And of course, the other thing you need is good policy. For example, policy that makes sure that if companies are making enormous sums of money by basically disrupting everything in our economy with new technology, that some amount of that enormous wealth that's being created comes back to the American public that, after all, did things like fund the invention of the internet in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about AI and the future work. This is really our fourth industrial revolution, and we're in the middle of it right now with AI.
We're in the beginning of it. It's like just getting started.
Yeah.
It's just getting started.
And, where do you see that? What advice would you give to our brothers and veterans who, 200,000 every year do transition and become veterans and enter the workforce?
The most important thing I would say is think of AI like a skill, not a career field. It's not that you have to go work for a tech company in order to be part of the technological change that's happening. It's that you need to learn more about how to use these tools to make you better at whatever it is you do, whether you're a writer or a doctor or an electrical worker. You might benefit from being adept at using these AI tools that are now publicly available. I think of it kind of like email. Very few of us will have email be something we work on literally, like go work for a company that makes email software. I guess a few people will. But all of us need to have some competence in using it just to get through our day jobs and our lives. And I think AI is very much the same thing.
Yeah, so you already hinted at this, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more fully about this. So what is the role in public-private partnership as it relates to the pace of change we're experiencing technologically and the workers that may or may not be displaced as that technology comes to bear?
Well, one thing that I think policy should do and government should do is make sure that America is leading the way on these technologies. That the frontier of economic development and technological development is here in the U.S. rather than anywhere else, and that we train and support the best workers in the world on that. Now, that's not only something for government to do, but government has to help all the way from K through 12 education to programming to make sure that veterans can apply their skills in new ways, to the way that we shape labor markets with things in the tax code that right now, are a little bit screwy. I mean, our tax code taxes work more than it taxes technology, and it really throws things out of balance. But that public-private handshake is vital to any of this stuff working. And, when I was working on transportation, for example, our thought was the government's role is to fund some basic research that private industry just won't do because it's not profitable yet. And then once industry does its thing, to make sure that it's safe and that it unfolds in the right ways, not to pick winners and losers in this company or that company, but to put up the guardrails, predictable boundaries that a company can use to develop its new technology. I'll give you an example. I think automated vehicles, there's a lot of angst over this. I think some people, you see one of these driverless cars go by and it's pretty spooky. I was just in one the other day. But also there's an enormous opportunity here. I don't just mean a business opportunity. I mean a safety opportunity, because unlike the example I just gave you of aviation safety, America tolerates far too many people being injured and killed on our roadways. I mean, it's on par with gun violence, something like 100 to 150 people a day. And it doesn't have to be that way. And good technology can actually help. So I think the role of government is to make sure that as those technologies get deployed, that there's a very clear safety framework for that, but also to let them try and fail different, use different models. It's okay to succeed or fail when it comes to your business. It's just not okay to fail when it comes to other people's safety.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's why the Office of Strategic Capital and some of the DARPA and ARPA initiatives, like these seeding initiatives, are such critical to both the defense community, but also just the writ large community as well.
Exactly. Huge civilian benefit from that kind of research that's going on, from mRNA vaccines that have saved so many lives to the internet itself.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and part of that's the trust and communication. When you say, hey, we're going to do some investment, we're going to do some seed money, and here are the guardrails. So, go forth and conquer. Hey, before we let you go, we got to ask, the polls in New Hampshire say that you're leading in 2028 for president. Are you considering it? Where is your headspace?
I feel like I'm at least a year away from that kind of big life decision. I see the same tweets and news stories and polls that everybody else does. But I'll tell you, as committed as I am to public service, as much as I love being on the road, like I'm going to be even later today for candidates and causes that I support, I'm also really enjoying the fact that I'm not in office right now for the first time in a long time, and just doubling down on doing what I can to do right by my job as Papa. So there's a time for everything, but presidential politics will definitely be consuming all of our attention before too long. I'm not going to let that be any sooner than it has to be.
Yeah. Well, listen, we appreciate it. Certainly, Pete, we appreciate being on War Money. We appreciate your service to our great nation in and out of uniform and what you continue to do. So that's going to wrap up War Money. Check us out wherever you hear podcasts or find us at Yahoo Finance. I'm Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Dan Kunze. We'll see you again next week.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.